Welcome. I'm Alfred Lerot Weber, and I'm here today on October 24th, World Oneness Day, which is coinciding with United Nations Day, which they celebrate. And as we will learn much more in detail with author Dr. Johan Calleman, who is the author of The 9 Waves of Creation and many other books that explore a hypothesis that he will explain much more in detail about the intentional universe. Welcome, Dr. Calleman. I'm so glad that you joined us. I received your message that you sent out. I read your book, your latest book, The 9 Waves of Creation. It was compelling reading, believe me. And when you sent out a message that World Oneness Day, United Nations Day, October 24th, 2017, today, falls at the, quote, maximum peak of the 9th wave, I said, this is an extraordinary synchronicity, coincidence, driver, wake-up call. I mean, I couldn't think of all of the terms. So I'm very glad that you've agreed to join us today and take time out of your schedule. And please, could you just bring our viewers in and people who, you know, both have been following your work and following all of this, going back to the Harmonic Convergence, going to a lot of these events, but also people who may just now be saying, oh, what is this all about? And we have as much time as you would like. So please take as much time as you wish.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Alfred, for making this interview. And I think it's a very appropriate day that you have chosen to make it. Not only because it happens that the 9th wave is peaking right now, but also then, as you said, this is the United Nations Day, and it's also World Oneness Day, presumably chosen based on the United Nations Day. And, you know, I guess I want to just start by pointing out that I think the whole idea of United Nations and a unified structure for all the nations of the world is a very wonderful and very good idea. Especially, I think it's worth pointing out today, since it's in our time, there's a lot of people that are turning to nationalism as an alternative. And I firmly believe that in order to move forward towards oneness, we will have to transcend nationalism, which is really nothing but taking egoism to a higher level and making it like favoring particular nations at the expense of other nations. And I think that is part of oneness, is to move away from that. And in all kinds of ways, promote global collaboration and ultimately removal of the borders between countries. But yes, to return to your question about what is the origin of this, and you mentioned the Harmonic Convergence in 1987, essentially done at the promotion of Jose Argüelles, and he in turn based it on the Mayan calendar. It was a particular shift point in the Mayan calendar, and it had the effect that a lot of people came to realize, I think, that there are underlying factors, underlying waves, as I would say, that is driving the spirituality and mentality of human beings. And at that particular point, a lot of people did experience a change, not in the whole world, so to speak, but suddenly there emerged a group of people that seems to be receptive to these kind of energies that he had talked about. And based on this and many other things, I and others have been going more deeply into the Mayan calendar, trying to see the systematic patterns that are present in it. And in my view, that's expressed in, for instance, in this last book that you mentioned, The 9 Waves of Creation. In my view, then, all of evolution ultimately goes back to what you might say underlying waves of creation. And they exist at 9 different levels. And I think it deserves to point out that many ancient traditions, including the Abrahamic religions, have a view that humanity passes through from unity through separation, and then ultimately like a return to unity. And what the Mayan calendar system does is that it gives a rational background for all those people that believe that that's part of the human path, or the path of humanity, to return to a unity that's been lost. And these waves then, they influence the human mind in such a way that depending on what waves we resonate with, we perceive reality in different ways. It's sort of the mind control of the cosmos, if you want to call it that. In other words, what's being created here on this planet by this humanity is not just their own making. It ultimately comes out of a series of waves that seem to adhere to a kind of a cosmic plan that has this purpose of a return to unity. And the ancient Mesoamerican peoples, in other words, the peoples that were living in what is now Mexico and Guatemala, they had a very special calendar system that really isn't matched in other parts of the world. They had a calendar system that was not based on just astronomical cycles, but on changes on a more spiritual level. And typically they would symbolize these waves with something they refer to as the plumed serpent. And this plumed serpent, for instance, would be the bringer of civilization. But it would also be that when the plumed serpent disappeared, civilizations would break down, and there would be periods of rest or destruction until the plumed serpent returned. And this was, as I see it, without any doubt, a metaphor for one of the particular waves that the Mayan calendar system describes. And there are 9 of these waves, and they have been since the beginning of time, since what modern physicists refer to as the Big Bang, about 15 billion years ago. Since that time, there's been a sequential activation of such creation waves, each endowed with the creation of a particular aspect of reality. And when it comes to the higher of these waves, then it really is about creating the human mind, developing human mind in a stepwise fashion. And the harmonic convergence, as you mentioned, was then really sort of a time marking the beginning towards the sort of the completion of all these waves. And completion in the sense that it was only in 2011 that all of these waves were activated. And they are now all running in parallel. And we can sort of tune into any of these waves that we choose to. And it turns out that people choose to tune into different waves. Some waves are those that have created nationalism and different religions with strict boundaries, so to speak. And those waves are really then waves of duality. In other words, they're coming out of a mind frame that tends to separate. But the hopeful part of all this is the fact that the last wave to be activated, which was in March of 2011, was the 9th wave. And that's the wave that, if you tune into it and resonate with it, it brings the possibility of unity consciousness. It brings the possibility of perceiving reality in a way that is not separating. And to the extent that you're able to create that kind of a resonance, you will then also start to create another kind of reality. In other words, we create reality outside of ourselves that is consistent with how we perceive reality. And so this is ultimately the task of the 9th wave, to bring back humanity into a state of unity, of changing our perceptions in such a way that we no longer just automatically create separations between ourselves, other people, other nations, nature, God, or what have you. It's a way that I would say its purpose is to recreate the unity that once existed. And the 9 waves, they have different frequencies. And this 9th wave, it has the highest frequency, or the shortest wavelength. So the wavelength of such a wave is 36 days. And those wave periods, they have peaks and they have valleys that alternate with the peaks, much like any sine wave, much like electromagnetic waves. And it's not a terribly unique event then that today happens to be a peak in this 9th wave. But it will happen again in 36 days, and then again in 36 days, and so forth. But nonetheless, it is just a remarkable and very noteworthy coincidence that this proclaimed World Oneness Day, United Nations Day, it happens to be on a peak, on that wave period that is, as far as I can understand it, is meant to bring back humanity to oneness and unity, and through changing our minds. And this, I think it's not something that this is a particular day that everything will change from this on. What it takes is that we make the commitments really to continually resonate with this unity wave of consciousness, and continually change our actions in consistent with that kind of a oneness and unity consciousness. And it's impossible to say how long time this will take. It's in a sense, it's been a very short period of time. It's only then 6 years that this wave has been active. And the people that have been fully born into this are then less than 6 years. But nonetheless, it is a process that has started. And it's a process that I hope that more and more people will tune into and for themselves realize that this is real. And quite a large number of people at this point do know that this is a real wave. And it's by following the ups and downs of this wave and seeing the effects that these ups and downs will have in your personal attitudes, in your personal life. It's through that experience that you will understand that this is a real wave going towards oneness. And I think just the very fact of knowing that there is such an underlying system for the evolution of our species that the Mayan calendar has described, just knowing that, and just knowing that the highest of its waves actually is designed, you might say, or at least has the function of bringing back humanity to a state of oneness, I think is a very important insight.
Right. I wanted to remind our viewers of an important case which happened exactly seven years ago today on United Nations Day, or thereabouts. And that was that it had to do with Stanley Fulham, who was a lifelong Canadian NORAD officer, the North American Radar Command, which is a joint command of the United States and Canada, which monitors all craft entering the North American airspace. And he, over the years, had monitored many what they have come to know and known as interdimensional or extraterrestrial aircraft, monitoring the North American space. And so after he retired, the representatives of what he came to know as the Regional Galactic Governance Council, and that is an intergalactic council of advanced human civilizations from Alpha Centauri, from Sirius, from about 7 different advanced human upper dimensional civilizations that more or less have charge of Earth, which is kind of an entry-level civilization, began to communicate with him, mainly through telepathic means. And they communicated to him that they were going to appear over New York and unshield their ships on October 13th, 2010. This is in that period of official events at the United Nations for about 2 weeks prior to October 24th, which is sort of the culminating date. And so Stanley Fulham became so enmeshed with this that he actually published a book in the summer of 2010 in which he said the Regional Galactic Governance Council is going to appear over New York City on October 13th, 2010. And when he did so, everyone in the field, including myself, as we said, Stanley, you have really gone berserk. Well, of course, October 13th, 2010 came, and the skies of New York were filled with galactic spaceships. And, you know, and we have photographs. People can go to ExopoliticsTV, and we have photographs of people standing on the sidewalks of Manhattan, looking up at the skies and seeing the skies full of galactic ships. And of course, the mainstream media that are taxed to shield this said, oh, those are balloons. They're balloons that were released at a birthday party in the Bronx. So,
good try.
And October 13th was the day before October 14th, which was the day that the United Nations Outer Space Conference, which is normally located in Vienna, the Outer Space Office, held a special meeting in New York to announce the protocol, hold hearings on the protocols that they would have to welcome what if extraterrestrials suddenly appeared on Earth, what would be their protocols. Now, so here we had a decloaking of the fleet on October 13th. The next day, the United Nations Outer Space Office had its meeting, and Stanley Fulham, the lifelong NORAD officer in charge of monitoring outer spacecraft for NORAD, had announced it in June of 2010. So this is pretty solid stuff. And I wondered if you could comment on all of that from the perspective of your scientific observation, which is a multidimensional.
Well, you know, in terms of the ninth wave, this particular event, it falls within what I would call the pre-wave to the ninth wave. In other words, there are sort of waves that prepare for the activation of the real waves. To give another example of that, the event of the Harmonic Convergence was the activation of a pre-wave that prepared for the later activation of the eighth wave. So that's what I would say. That's all I can add to this particular scenario. But I should also more generally like to add that this kind of an understanding of the cosmos as being created by waves emanating from the center of the universe and being broadcast throughout the universe. It's an understanding of the universe that is consistent with the idea that, you know, we certainly are not alone on this planet, and that life, not just accidentally, but you might say by design, has been created throughout the universe, and we don't know the limits to that or anything like that, but that's part of this way of looking at reality. I think that's what I'd like to comment on this.
Right. Now, you have written many books on this subject, and really have brought a sustained and scientifically based understanding of the intentional and conscious universe, and of the conscious and wave-based process of control of creation in a holographic universe. And how do you see this scientific understanding manifesting itself in our social future? Will this be taught in our educational system? Will our society and future humans begin to somehow incorporate this into their understanding? Is this necessary for humanity to begin to interact with other more advanced civilizations? Is this part of our breaking out of our interdimensional quarantine and interplanetary quarantine?
Well, I think definitely this is part of the destiny of humanity. And I think it will, over time, break through as more and more people realize that is real, and that it actually serves them best to be in alignment with the cosmic plan. And what I mean by that is not what I or anybody else would say about the cosmic plan. We all have individual purposes, destinies, but we should also realize that those individual destinies that we may have to make the decisions about ourselves, these destinies are part of a larger collective destiny of humanity. And the way to manifest oneness, I think, can never be a purely individualist thing. It has to be based on this recognition that there is a wave movement going towards unity consciousness, and then we keeping our individual integrity and individual destinies, we should subordinate those individual destinies to what seems to be the collective plan. And I think unless we do, we will fail. And not only as individuals, but also more largely as nations or a civilization. And I'm doing what I can, and other people are also doing what they can in order to bring this kind of insights into people. So I think that's really what I want to say is that it is a choice. It requires an intention of all of our parts. I think there might be many people that are actually serving the overall destiny of oneness without knowing the kind of background in the 9 waves that I may be providing. But nonetheless, I think even if people can do a lot of good things without this knowledge, it certainly helps, absolutely helps, because to the extent that you can either grasp it intellectually, which is not very difficult, or you can experience it through your own life, then you will start to see that you are a part of some bigger plan, and that there actually exists that kind of a plan. There is this whole, I would say, this whole lie that has essentially been perpetuated by the scientific world of our planet, that life is an accident and whatever happens on our planet is an accident. And that is it's not only a worldview that I think is false, it's also a worldview that I think is very disempowering, because if everything came out of accidents, then what power do we have to change things, and what power do we have to recreate a world of oneness? So for that reason, I think it's also a very significant thing for people to realize that we are part of a plan where different waves are creating ups and downs in life on our planet. And even if not every change in this plan, not every shift in the phases of this wave we will experience positive, it's still part of an overall process. And sometimes what is creations of the past will need to be transcended by what is the overall destiny of humanity, and that is one of oneness.
Right. Now, judging from from what has occurred in terms of propagation of new insights in the past. Have you received feedback from, say, trends that you see or correspondence that you receive, that how is the mainstream industries receiving these insights, the insights of the 9 waves that we call disruptive insights? That's not a negative term, because these are insights that come in and they disrupt the status quo in religions or in science. They disrupt the established concepts of religion, of what God is or how God intervenes, of science, of how the universe functions, of how creation functions. Have you seen changes in the status quo religions or in the status quo sciences or in the status quo of the way humanity, and governments function? Do you see these new ideas of the 9th wave actually manifesting their force?
Well, I think I see it in different regards. Speaking of religions, I think the election of the most recent Pope, I think it was 2012, if I recall correctly, was a very bold step, but also certainly a step that points to, in my view anyway, a positive change in what is the world's largest church. It's an example. I mean, these kind of institutions are like moving slowly, and they don't do abrupt shifts very often. But that would, to me, would be an example of a change in a positive direction, and it happened essentially right after this 9th wave was activated. Then, when it comes to science, I think it's a very mixed bag, so to speak. When you talk about official science, I see very little change taking place. But when it comes to a lot of individual scientists, I would say there is a changed openness to more holistic views that is constantly going on. And certainly, it's actually an enormous change that have been taking place over maybe as much as 20 or 30 years in terms of the kind of interest that the public at large have in science. The public at large no longer just want to hear the official materialist explanations to phenomena. The public at large is much more interested in scientists that have taken the step to go into holistic views and try to put the science into a meaningful context where there is a higher purpose to our lives.
Right. Are there any thoughts or that you had wanted to bring to this workshop that you have not had a chance to express yet?
I think I'm happy about what I've had the chance to present already. I could speak for days, but nothing really comes to mind as a specific thing that I haven't said. Well, maybe I should backtrack a little bit and describe the system that essentially is based on the Mayan calendar.
Okay.
And I think that could be useful. It's to begin with, you might say the Mayan calendar is unique among the calendars of the world in that it's not based on astronomical cycles. It's not based on the physical reality, which is the case for all other calendars. And this may sound quite strange to people that have heard that the Mayans were great astronomers, and that remains true. But what people may not realize is that they had the calendar before they started to make astronomical observations. In other words, they did not, as all the other peoples, base the calendar on astronomical observations. So what this means then is that they had a calendar system that were based on the underlying changes, not in the physical manifest changes, but in the underlying, what you might say, spiritual waves. And that idea is not, the idea of the plumed serpent is certainly not unique to the Maya. I mean, the Aborigines in Australia had the idea of the rainbow serpent. The Bushmen in Kalahari had the idea of a giant python that was the creator. The peoples in the Amazonas believed that there was this great anaconda that gave birth to humanity. So all of these, in modern language, what all of these very ancient traditions were saying was that there were waves that they experienced as serpents, obviously, that there were waves underlying reality that created humanity and its future path. Now, the people that brought this into a systematic and even a mathematical refinement were then the peoples of Mexico and Guatemala, to mention the current day nations. And I think the very best metaphor that they gave for how this creation system works is their pyramids, that typically in the most famous of the Mayan pyramids, including that in Chichen Itza, that has been honored to be one of the current world wonders of the world, 7 wonders of the world. These pyramids were built in 9 levels, and they had staircases where their priests and shamans could climb, symbolizing that they, when doing so, they were going through the evolution of the universe, climbing to higher and higher levels. And each of these levels, you might say, was developed with by a particular wave, and which in turn was developed by a particular frequency. And so it's not that the waves replace each other. It's more like, the waves, they build upon another, as a terrace pyramid builds upon each other. And that's an important thing to realize. And then these pyramids then reflect the sequential activation of waves and the levels of consciousness that the universe has gone through from its very beginning. And I should say one wave was activated in about 5,000 years ago. That's the civilizational wave. Then another was activated in 1755, and that's the wave of industrialism, you might say. Then another was activated in 1999. You might say that's the digital wave. And then The last one, the highest one, was activated in 2011. And I guess this wave then is meant to not destroy in any sense all the advances of civilizations and its technologies, but bring it back into a world where people are using it in a context of oneness, changing the mindset, in other words, of people, so that we start to see differently, so that we, rather than separating, we're unifying with our mind. And so that's the 9-step pyramids of the Maya, and they have a much deeper meaning than most visitors probably realize. But they have a meaning as a metaphor for this universe and its evolution.
Right. You know, it always struck me, for example, going back to the initiation of the wave in 1755, when I wrote a book that was looking at the integration of psychic and prophecy and earth sciences. 1755 is also very famous in seismology because it's the year of the Lisbon earthquake. And I'm just wondering if there's a correlation there between these huge earth changes and the initiation. Which wave was that? Was that the
seventh?
Seventh, right.
Yeah.
Whether there would be a correlation between the seventh wave and this enormous earth change that would somehow, that's how the energy worked itself out.
Yeah, I suspect so. I suspect that some of these very large earthquakes are connected to the activation of certain waves. The wave that or the earthquake that you mentioned that destroyed the city of Lisbon in 1755. It was a huge one. I mean, it's estimated to 9 on the Richter scale. And something similar happened in 2011. The 9th wave was activated on March 9th. And then on March 11th, there was this huge earthquake in Fukushima in Japan, and the nuclear crisis that happened at that time. And I remember, because I was on a boat in the Pacific, and we were all wondering if we would feel the wave coming through. We didn't really, but certainly this was not an ordinary scale earthquake. It's also considered as magnitude 9 on the Richter scale. And you may wonder, why would this be? Well, I think there's, I'm making a case, especially in a previous book of mine, The Global Mind, where that the Earth, and especially the inner core of the Earth, is an intermediary. It's sort of the mind polarities that we as human beings are expressing are actually transmitted through the Earth. They come from the center of the universe, and then we are in resonance with the Earth. And when changes happen, when a new wave is activated, then not only will our mindset change, but as part of that, there are probably inner changing taking place in the Earth that is accommodating the transmission of a new wave from the center of the universe. And these changes then, as those happen, may then, it seems like, be able to spark or create these kind of earthquakes on the surface of our planet. Some reorganization takes place, I think, in the inner core of the Earth at these activation times.
Now, this is, of course, some paradoxes emerge, and these are areas of some controversy. Let's say, looking at the distinction between the possible distinctions, I should say, between the Lisbon earthquake of 1755 and the Fukushima event of March 11th, 2011, in the following sense. And this is areas of controversy, and the only reason that I know about it is that we did a series of interviews with seismologists and nuclear scientists in the case of Fukushima, who claim that, in fact, they use what's called seismic warfare, clandestine seismic warfare, in terms of taking directed energy weapons to actually set off Earth processes to trigger the seismic events that would result in a tsunami and in earthquakes that would trigger the events at Fukushima that would in turn cause nuclear events that would in turn cause nuclear pollution of the oceans. And this is caused by, according to this theory, clandestine negative military intelligence forces whose plan is a depopulation of the Earth, in that case by poisoning, by nuclear radiation of the human population. So this is not a negation of the ninth wave theory, but it's just showing an intervention there. And so it's just a slight complication. To me, so there's this interplay of negative versus positive consciousness that is at work there. I'd love to send you some of the links of that research, which is a hypothesis, but it just adds some of the complications there in that, to that thing.
Okay.
Yeah. And but still that stands, and in fact, one theory is that the negative forces are aware of the validity of these theories and are attempting to intervene and manipulate the Earth. That is, to create pseudo events that are, to create a false second coming of the Christ, a false, they sort of a psychological warfare on the super conscious of the humans. So it's as though they are acting like God. They are acting like the supernatural forces. This is one theory that we've been discovering. In other words, that they track all of these discoveries, and then as intelligence agencies, they go out and mimic them. So that I just wanted to throw out that theory that they in fact track all of this advanced work very carefully and then try to appropriate it. Do you have any comment on that also?
Well, I'm not really going in that direction. That would be I'm not sure if it really serves anyone either. I think the focus should be on doing good for everyone, and certainly, that will meet with resistance in different forms.
Right.
That on that point I'm absolutely clear, and also on the fact that there is a lot of people on this planet that have a power that they don't want to let go of. In my understanding, through this type of theory that I have developed, these are people that are still in resonance with the duality of the sixth wave, which goes back then to 3115 BC. That whole wave, these 5,000 years, is really 5,000 years of dominance of a small minority of the others, whether the dominators were pharaohs, as was the case 5,000 years ago, or priest kings and so forth, or as more recently has been huge bankers or so forth. That's a little bit the principle of dominance has existed throughout this whole time. And in my understanding, this dominance is not really created by the rulers. It's more like the mindset is shared by everyone. The slave mentality is shared by the slaves and the rulers alike. But the real issue is the duality that has made people accept this. These dominance systems and all kinds of injustices that humanity have suffered from. And I would say it's been, there have been times in the history of humanity when this has taken terrible forms. And this duality of the mind nurtures this separation between different groups of people. But I think if you can look upon it in two different ways. You can look upon it in a conspiratorial way, thinking that this system of dominance were created by the human beings themselves. Well, if that's the case, then there's really no hope. Then there's really very little to do except for, getting rid of those people. The other, but then, if it's created by the human beings themselves, then it would research in another form, one way or another. Now, the other way of looking at it is that this dominant system is created by a particular wave with a particular mind that people are downloading. And to the extent that they are downloading it, this kind of dominance will be sustained and will be seen as natural, because these mindsets that the waves are bringing, they are to human beings like the water is to the fish. It's just what people are naturally swimming in. And unless people come to realize that the evolution of the world depends on what waves they are choosing to resonate with, this kind of system will probably prevail. I would look upon it as there are real conspiracies out there. But there's also a tremendous amount of false conspiracies out there, made up stories that basically are based on the kind of fears that certain individuals may have. And it doesn't necessarily serve us. I think what serves us is to find solutions and find ways of actions that are consistent with unity consciousness.
Right. So in one sense, part of every human being's in varying degrees at the individual level, part of every human being's struggle would be the struggle between the sixth wave consciousness within them and the ninth wave consciousness.
That's very well said, I think. Exactly so.
Yeah. And how do you think people would best overcome that sort of struggle?
Well, I think, people have to, I think it's not something you ever, well, I shouldn't say ever, but it's not something you overcome once and for all. Throughout life, we will always be confronted with a different kind of choices of this type. But a good start is to become aware of the existence of these waves, and then also make the intentions. Set the intention and sort of make a choice as to whether you are someone that wants to create resonance with a unity wave, or if you want to stay in a duality wave. It's ultimately, this is a choice. But of course, to the extent that people find out about it and understand the underlying principles of evolution, then people will have a better basis for making these kind of choices.
Very good. How can people who really are just now becoming aware of the depth that they can apply your discoveries and your science to their personal lives, how can they get in touch with you and with your work?
There is a website. My own website is calleman.com. There is the Facebook pages, one of which I have with my collaborator in South Africa, Sean Caulfield. Facebook pages about the 9 waves of creation, a number of them, and that will allow, I think, a very important point I want to make here. There is a calculator on these Facebook pages as well as on my webpage that using it tells you exactly where are you in the 9th wave at this moment in time. And it was based on such a calculator that you could see that today is when this particular peak in the 9th wave is at its maximum. Then it's, I guess, sometimes it sounds like people want me to tell them what to do, so to speak, and that's not really what I can do, except for telling them that this is real. This is how the universe evolves its various planets, and you can't choose to develop resonance with a particular wave. And if you choose to develop resonance with the 9th wave, which is really the only one that has a reasonable short wavelength of 36 days to make this more of a habit, then you will experience the peaks differently from the valleys. And you will see that if you have intentions of oneness and if you want to manifest this in the world, a lot of people like myself have the experience that if there is a peak, then those intentions will have the wind on their backs. But then the peaks are always alternating with the valleys. And in my experience, and in a number of other people that are sharing this wave resonance, then you don't really have that kind of a wind on your back in the night periods, in the valley periods. Rather, you'll have to deal with whatever is in your past or in your attitudes that are not consistent with the movement towards oneness. I would say that the very fact that you're inviting me to this very interview, which I'm very grateful for, it's not an accident that happens on this particular maximum of this peak. But it's even that, over time, then, if you will have to start to see what are the peaks telling you, what kind of guidance are you getting in the peak periods, because that's the guidance you should follow. If you can see that some guidance is clearly coming out of these peaks, then that is the guidance that you should follow if you want to be part of the destiny of humanity. But again, what that means to an individual is not something I can speak about. People have to find that for themselves.
Yeah, well, just one last point, though. Here we have on the United Nations Day, October 24th, the peak of the 9th wave. And so from the 9th wave point of view, I'd like to ask you, but first I'd like to say that out there's a tremendous amount of negative memes about the UN. Oh, it was founded by the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, and it's actually just one more mechanism for the enslavement of humanity. Oh, it's anti-democratic. Oh, it supports genocide, blah, blah, blah. And all of that is paradoxical to the values of the 9th wave. And so I wondered if you could bridge that gap for us and cut through the duality into the unity of why October 24th, United Nations Day, and World Oneness Day would fall on the peak of the 9th wave. Just lead us through that unity.
Well, the whole concept of separate nations, it's not something that's cut in stone. If you go back more than 5,000 years ago, before Egypt became a monarchy, there were no nations. People were sort of living in bigger, presumably much more peaceful relationships of a more tribal nature. Now, so the nation as such is a creation of a particular wave. It begins then 5,000 years ago when the 6th wave is activated and the first nation states are formed in Sumeria and in Egypt. And then it's been developed. And now people have come to believe that the nation is something, at least some people, and I would say some divisive people are thinking that the nation is some kind of an ideal that has some kind of a higher meaning, while in fact it is just one of the phenomena that is created on the climb to the top of the pyramid. And even if I, want to point out that the pyramid as such is a metaphor that doesn't say that we should destroy what has been of the past, and so I definitely don't think there is a point in destroying the nation, but transcending it and making it a lesser part of how we organize life. That is definitely a part of the process of oneness, and which is then really what is being brought by the by the 9th wave. And I would think that if there are higher civilizations out there in the universe, then they are not sort of divided in different nations or segments the way that our planet currently is. And the ideal, I think, is to transcend these sort of national egotism that has become very popular and also has sort of been developed to discredit global collaboration, for instance, in the form of the United Nations. The current situation is created by a mixture of effects of the different waves. And I know that in 2012, there's a lot of people that expected that there would be changes in a positive direction all across the board. Now, this didn't happen. And what we have today in the world today is some people, or a large part of people, that are actually more reacting and going backwards into a more separatist and nationalist way of relating to the world. At the same time, there's also an increasing amount of people that see the future of humanity, and especially young people, as transcending these divisiveness that has recently become popular. And the path there is the ninth wave. And the fact that this is the last of the waves to be activated, I think means that this is really what the destiny of humanity, and something we should really honor and see as a privilege that we have the ability to go in that direction.
Now, I'm sorry, but there is the inevitable question, and that is, once humanity experiences the ninth wave, what is the next step?
I think it's just, my view is that it's just a matter of going deeper and deeper into it, that will mean a deepened spiritual awareness of the unity of all things, and at the same time, sort of be clear that this will be individual processes as well, but I don't see sort of any any disruptive event breaking that up. It's a matter of going deeper and deeper, and as the unity becomes the water that we swim in, we will not even think about the need or the desire to take another step.
Well, Dr. Calleman, thank you very much for joining us today, for taking your time. Thank you very much for your work, and I hope that in the future, as events develop, you'll be able to join us again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alfred. I really appreciated it. Thank you.
Good enough.
Good enough.